When you're voice acting for something like a video game or a TV show, is there really any difference on what it demands of you, or?
There is technically, and there is from the teaching of it and the learning of it, probably most significantly because in video games today, with very, very few exceptions, you find yourself acting in a vacuum. The relationship is between you and the director. He has to paint you in emotionally. He has to paint you in as far as responses to things you're doing. This is a necessity in video games because the game is built by the sound editor and mixer. Because you're in a world where there's really an infinite number of responses to any given situation, because it's player driven, the player is the director of the action. You have to cover almost every action you do almost in an infinite number of ways, so that depending on how the player plays out the game, you have to live an infinite number of ways, you have to die in an infinite number of ways, and you have to respond an infinite number of ways. And then that all has to be fit in like a jigsaw puzzle very intricately by whoever's mixing or editing the piece. Well, that means you're acting in little slivers of motion and emotion, and so it's a technical skill more than an artistic or creative skill. There really is no flow to interactive video game acting, and yet you're required to make it feel as if there is. So the burden is on the director and the people on the other side of the glass to keep you honest and truthful. David Sobolov was saying he studied with Sanford Meisner in New York, and that your task as an actor is to continue to bring truth to an imaginary workplace or an imaginary environment. Well, that's the most imaginary of environments, and you're bringing truth to a situation you can't possibly pretend to understand. And in interactive video acting, the book of prompts and cues is so thick that you can always tell who the game developer is, because he's the guy in the room who looks like he hasn't slept for 5 to 10 years, because he hasn't.
That's what you look forward to.
It's impossible to generate that much material, that much actual material, and it's real. They're huge physical amounts of paper, and sometimes you'll end up going back for months or years because and whoever archives all this data that actually gets layered into what becomes a video game, it's mind-boggling. And they layer and layer and layer and layer and layer, and then those end up being the levels of a game. That's all outside my control. I just do what I'm asked to do in any given session. But when somebody wants to, prepare themselves to do that, be that, it's almost unteachable, because you're the people who end up being the working pool of actors who get called again and again and again. This is the unteachable part. You just have the same way in commercial acting, you have to have this brain clock that knows what a 29-second read is, or a 29.5-second read is, or a 30-second on the dot read is, or they say we need you to cut half a second, we need you to add back a quarter of a second, we need you, and somehow in your brain, the people that work repeatedly know how to do that. I can't tell you how I know how to do that. I just know where to find that quarter of a second, add it back, take it away. That's a gift that I have in my brain clock. In interactive video, I can get material, read it cold, and commit to choices within that material that almost feels like channeling, and go through pages and pages and pages and pages of dialogue that I've never seen before, and they only stop to correct me when I'm out of the zone, when something doesn't ring true. As long as the director is communicating the intent of a given situation, we're just like in the zone together. We're just going and going and going and going. then they'll say, stop, we're getting off track. And we're either saving the galaxy or in a combat situation or in a intense, strategy room, whatever it is. Or, maybe it's a you're in the 100-acre wood and these anime kids have come in and they got hair going this way, hair going, and I'm just looking for thistles. And then there they come, and here we are, and now we're all in a room together. And whatever it is. So it's just, you've got this shared space, but the relationship is between you and this is the longest answer to a short question in the history of ever.
It's a good answer.
But it's all true. So that's the interactive world. The animated world, when I started, I was the new kid, but it was the given was that it was all ensemble acting. Everybody, every studio had these octopus microphone setups, but I assumed it would always be that way. Actors want to play in the sandbox with every other actor that you're working with. It was always that way. Hanna-Barbera was always set up that way. Wally Burr was always set up that way. The given was that you were going to go into a large studio and act with other actors. Well, that's contagious. If it's funny, it gets funnier because you're playing. If it's intense, it gets more intense. If it's epic, it gets more epic. Whatever it is, it gets more of because you have the ability to bounce off each other. That's becoming a lost art. This makes it harder as a teacher to send new people out there to go play because there's not as much play left. It's becoming more like the other world I was just describing. Very often you're called in because it's your turn to record by yourself. And sometimes they'll play the other actors in your headphones, so you're maybe talking to other people, but not working with other people. You're recording by yourself. Why? Because it seems to be easier for them to build performances later rather than just have you record together. Sharon?
Building on that, what I want to know is if you have some favorite stories of things that went on in the booth, especially working ensemble for things, with the Transformers or other shows. What things stand out for you that were either really funny or just that was a really good session or?
Good memory.
Every session with Welker. Every single. I did the Garfield show, and Frank Welker, who was Megatron on Transformers and a million other, is the not new, for the past 5 years, he's been the voice of Garfield as well. Voiceover trivia, the G1 voices of Megatron and Grimlock are the current voices of Garfield and Odie. So, if that doesn't make the case for vocal versatility, nothing ever will. That's really work in the waterfront. Yeah, I mean, Frank used to get bored, so he would make the noise of the studio exploding or wires arcing or whatever, and every engineer and technical person would either duck for cover or start grabbing every calibrating tool they'd ever owned and try to figure out what the heck had just gone wrong. Or Frank would stand in the corner when the other side of the glass didn't know we're either in a writing session trying to fix a moment or a scene or something, and start doing an imaginary phone call to someone in Denver, and you'd hear the sound of the coins going into the payphone, which wasn't there. There is no payphone in the studio, obviously, but you forget that because you hear, I don't do telephone noises, but he does. And then you hear the phone ringing and you hear somebody picking up, and it's all Frank Welker. And then he does both sides of the phone call, and the operator cutting in, and then he hangs up and goes back to the microphone to wait for the thing to start again. But he just, Frank always said, well, it was this or college. Or Scatman would bring his ukulele one day, and You know, you just never want to be called in to read because you're having too wonderful a time in the green room or the parking lot or whatever. Yeah, and so even though the sessions were kind of interminable in length in those days, things were happening in your life that you didn't ever want to have end. So you were in no hurry for it to be over. I was in no hurry for it to be over. It was just I said this yesterday in the panel, the Transformers panel, but there was bonding going on in the studio and also outside the studio. So much so that I think that's what accounts for most of us being not only bonded within the confines of the show, but bonded as friends for a lifetime, for a career. We never don't look forward to seeing each other when we bump into each other around town or throughout our lives. I mean, I've had a terrific time this weekend just hanging out with the guys. It's been great. It's always great.
Do you have a personal favorite character? I'm sure all of us have our own favorite characters you play.
I have a stock answer. I can't tell you which of my children is my favorite. You know, I absolutely can't answer the question because everything is different for a different reason. There's things I love about every character I've ever created. I'm like Cinderella going to the ball every time I'm handed a script for something new. I really like finding the voice and doing the voice. I love when somebody calls back again, or when somebody says the show's been picked up, or when somebody. But you know, when you're allowed to carry on something that has had longevity, or an existing iconic character, or when you're creating a character that becomes iconic, everything for a different reason. You know, I mean, I'm one of the blessed, fortunate members of this community. I know people who certainly are as talented as I am, who haven't had the same series of events that led to ongoing, long-lasting opportunities like I've had. I'm not undervaluing my contribution. I keep up with the jump rope, and I do everything I'm supposed to do, and I bring exactly what I'm supposed to bring, which is your A game every time, every minute, you know, I know that I've been given these gifts to use them exactly the way that I use them. But anybody who doesn't think that there's good fortune that is a factor in all of this is absolutely out of their mind. And anybody who's not grateful for whatever good fortune any of us have been allowed to enjoy is also out of their mind. You know, anybody who thinks that they're entitled to any of this. Have I said it enough? Out of their mind.
Two questions. How do you choose a voice for a character? How do you come about the process? And an in-character question, how does Grimlock feel about his big screen debut?
G1 Grimlock. He lives in animated land, so he'll be in line like everybody else to buy a ticket for the movie. What was the first part of the question?
How do you go about, what's the process to choose a voice?
I think you show tremendous respect for the writer and the animator. You realize that this is detective work, that you've been given a million clues, and you look for the clues that the artist has given you. There's lots of them in there as soon as you're handed a drawing. Look for the way the mouth's been drawn, the size, the shape, the gender if necessary, the species, everything in there is clues. And they do for you, if you were an artist and if you're a creator, they all say things to you. You listen to what they say to you. The writer has built things in to sort of test you and see if you get the same joke they get. He gives you a whole series of clues from everything in his breakdown. That's the exciting part, is to pay attention to what's in the writing. It's not really to test you, it's to collaborate with you. That's the way I view it. So I listen. I listen to the artist and I listen to the writer. They're going to give you 2 dimensions of the character, but they're going to beg you to help them to discover the 3rd dimension. So you're going to mix all that up in your head and listen to everybody, but know that they're listening to you for whatever it is that they haven't put in there yet. And you're going to mix it all around, and then you're going to be asked to go into a studio, and these are all things I say when I teach, but as that studio door closes behind you, don't take it for granted and realize that whatever moment that is that you're asked to step up to the microphone, nobody else is occupying that space at that time except you. And think about how many other people might be there at that time in that space, but nobody is. So don't abuse that opportunity. Make it mean something, because they could have had anybody there, but they chose to have you. So make it mean something. Make it important. And don't obsess over all of the work you did out in the hallway or overnight when you had the material. Take all of that and all that it meant to you. Let it go. Step up to the mic and open your mouth and see what comes out. Let it be spontaneous. Don't be attached to all of that homework that you did. Really be a creator. Really trust it. But allow whatever happens in that moment to be real and honest and truthful and spontaneous. You already did the homework. Don't focus on that at the moment that you're creating at the mic. And if they give you notes, if they, which they will, they probably will, because they have some kind of preconceived notion. If they want to calibrate, if they want to fine tune what you've just offered them, let them really listen. Don't be so set on what you bring into that audition room and that microphone that you don't listen to what they ask you to modify, that you can't adapt. Be adaptable. The best background you can bring to a voiceover career is theater and school and being well-read because you're a reader, and improvisation, so that you're not locked into anything ever. Be flexible, be adaptable, and then remain flexible and adapt. You know, nobody's ever got the answer to anything. Just continue to find the answer. You know, it's out there, but it's never set in stone. But what do I know?
You never know, one day you might have to read Grimlock on a caffeine rush.
Exactly.
Any questions? There's gotta be more.
Have you ever gotten in the booth and you've gotten this assignment and you go, this scares the hell out of me? How do you feel?
I kind of like being scared.
Go on.
How do you respond to that? What does it do for you?
You don't mistake adrenaline for anything other than the stimulant that it is, and be stimulated. And what's the worst that could happen? You'll find out. You'll make a mistake. Mistakes are lessons, so go learn a lesson. I mean, unless it's a safety issue, don't endanger your safety. But if it's just a question of, if the worst that can happen is somebody will say that was awful, you'll survive that.
Any recommendations for those brave souls about to work with Wally Burke?
Just be flexible and be adaptable. And
If you line reads, just go with it.
as far as line reads, again, nobody has the absolute answer. I don't, if somebody gives you a line reading and is locked into that line reading, read it the way they want, read it the way you want. You have, in an interview situation, someone may be interviewing you, but at the same time that they're interviewing you, you're interviewing them. The idea is you want to do your best work together. You have as much input into a situation as the other person does. You're not a slave. It's a creative situation. You're working together. It's not a slave ship. No one's standing with a whip over anybody's head. And if the goal is to create something good and mutually agreeable, then create it together mutually agreeably. And if you have issues with the result of something, then the goal is to return to the process till everybody's happy with the result. There shouldn't be one person happy with the result. Mark Evanier feels that 90+% of directing is successful casting. If the casting is correct, he feels like the idea is to get out of the way and let the person that you've cast do what they came to do. And if it's not working, then you begin to modify it. But if the casting is correct, he always feels like the product will be correct. Everything will go right. And if you're not happy with the way something's gone, you should always ask to do it again, or say that didn't feel comfortable. I'd like to do. May I do it in a way that feels more comfortable to me? That really felt uncomfortable. Of course, you should always say that, and you should never feel like someone has more power over you than you have over yourself.
Thank you.
Ever. I mean, in life, nothing is, a lot of career stuff is parallel to life stuff. I've actually had people say to me, and I kind of couldn't believe it, but I've been asked, I got hired to do a commercial for something that I find absolutely abhorrent. What should I do? And I said, well, I can't make decisions for anybody else, but what if it were a life situation and had nothing to do with getting a paycheck, and somebody asked you to do something that you found personally abhorrent? You probably would have no problem saying no in real life. That's outside the bounds. I choose not to do that. Then you certainly have the same. If the only thing keeping you from saying no is that somebody's offering you money, then it seems to me like your choice is pretty clear. The only difference is money. Unless it's, unless it's you die if you don't get the money, or I don't know. I can't make decisions for anybody else about anything. But if it's just, I don't think you have. It doesn't sound like you should be conflicted over that. Yeah, but, and then the person went on and said, but I'm new to this agent. I said, I don't know the agent is going to disrespect you. In fact, at my agency, one of the first things you do when you sign with my agent is you give a list of things that you don't want to be considered for because you find them personally offensive to you, or you don't want to be attached, have your name on them. And I think that actually should be part of any agent signing. Why would you want to endorse something that you don't find that you have the ability to endorse? Anyway, it's kind of the same thing with everything. But I just think in the end game, you want to have a list of the things that you're willing to put your name on, and a list of things that you're not willing to put your name on. I don't mean to get all deep and dark and philosophical, but it's kind of, you are who you are. And when I teach, I have people write their own monologues for their demos. I do it as an exercise, but I just have you write a monologue. It can be about the guy who cut you off in traffic today, or whatever it is. Bowling, something good happened to you, something bad happened to you. It doesn't matter. It's just a monologue through your own eyes. The idea is to create a point of view that represents you. Of course, any of us can talk about ourselves easily. It's what we do. We do it at the dinner table. How was your day? How was your day? Something happened today. Whatever it was exclusive to you, and it represents your point of view. Then, I'm not trying to give away my teaching style, but then I have you do it as an animal in the woods, or as a mouse in the field, or whatever it is. But now, suddenly, you're giving traits that are true to you, honest to you, that you can talk about as yourself to a creature that's not you, and suddenly that creature has traits that are inherent to you. It rings a little more true than trying to do it, a silly voice just because it's a silly voice. I don't believe there are any silly voices. I don't believe that the people who cast are looking for silly voices. They're looking for characters. As soon as you have a point of view, and as soon as it's inherent to you, there is a character. And as soon as there's a character, any voice that's attached to that character is going to ring true to that character. Where was I going with that? Right away, you can put your name on it, and it's gonna ring true. If it's just technically created, it won't. It'll just be a silly voice, but it won't be grounded in anything.
Don't have any depth to it.
It won't have any depth. It'll just be painted on from the outside. You've seen impressionists who just paint the voice, paint the impression on from the outside. You've also seen impressionists who do impressions from the inside out. There's a difference in someone who becomes whatever it is they're doing instead of just sort of wearing it like a mask.
You probably got asked this a few times already this week, but we missed that panel. So what was it like? Did you get to work with Casey Kasem, in any of those ensemble, recordings? And what was he like?
Soft-spoken, diminutive, pleasant. I never knew him well. I really never spoke with him at any length outside of the recording studio. I would just say pleasant, but I knew him less well than I knew a lot of other people. He just seemed to always arrive on time. I never really had any downtime to get to know him like I did with other people.
What about some of those other people that you have to work with, like Chris Latta? Or
Chris Latta I spent a lot of time with. Chris Latta had an absolutely dynamic, tempestuous personality. I'm so glad he was able to put it behind a microphone and into a microphone, because he just had a fire inside. He really was kind of a wild man. If it was jokes he was telling, he'd be laughing at them faster and louder, and everything was louder and faster, louder, harder. He just lived loud. He was larger than life, and all of his characters were larger than life, but they just fit in. Animators always want as much as you can give them. In Hollywood, it's always do less, do less, do less, do less. But in animation, the more you give them, the more they like it. Bad, bad. Down, boy, down. Yeah, he was destined to be the performer that he was. And even his stand-up was aggressive, in your face. He was in your face. He was a great talent. May he rest in peace.
His daughter is apparently following in his footsteps.
She's a terrific person, and she works with Rob Paulson on the podcast, and we're friends. Yeah.
Is there a particular moment in your career that's just a really big moment of pride for you? You really poured your heart and soul into something?
A million, but when Matt Teacher had me in for Fall of Cybertron, and he explained that he was a Transformers fan growing up, and when he became a game developer. I've met people at conventions who grew up with Transformers who have become, you know, technical engineers and drafting people and just all manner of technical skills, but it all began, they say, or they come to my table and said, because they started with their Transformers, and they said, how does that work? How does that work? Well, I want to draw that. I want to draw, how does that, and then as they went on in their studies, they ended up, you know, becoming architects and they credit those toys with sort of setting that side of their mind in motion. And they, well, maybe if I do this, maybe if I do, oh, hey, well, I want to go to school. I want to read this. I want to draw that. And they have all created technical careers. It set him on a game development course and computer. Anyway, he was tied to Grimlock being prominent in Fall of Cybertron. He was tied to finding a way to have me play Grimlock. He said Hasbro hadn't seen me for some time, and they wanted me to read for it, and which I said, let me at it. And they were quick to say I exceeded their expectations, but I will say I poured my heart and soul into that game. I was so thrilled to be jumping back into the franchise, and so I would say that as prominent as anything was just, I just felt fantastic about jumping back in. And it was a deeper, darker, more cinematic just feel, and they gave me really interesting obstacles to deal with, and just the whole approach. So yeah, that's a very powerful